I'm very pleased to be speaking today with Mr. KV Kamath, the chairman of ICICI Bank, one of the benchmark institutions in India, one of the largest and fastest growing economies in the world. Mr. Kamath also increasingly prominent influencer in the global economy. Mr. Kamath, I just want to start by revisiting how your bank is doing and how it's pulling through in the crisis.
Let me put what has been said in context. The country is growing at the last reported figure of 6 3/4 the last year, and our own assessment at the bank is that it would grow probably at higher than 8% for the coming year. And I think any opportunity that we see in India has to be put in that context. The second context that we need to look at is the political stability that is now a given in the country without the pulls and pressures that the left would exert on any government. So 5 years of political stability with, I would say, the ability to do things that are needed to be done for this country. And these two things really have changed the mood of corporate India at this point in time. I'm sure as we go along, we'll change the mood of consumer India. When I say change the mood of corporate India, that means that the investment projects they had, probably in the last 6 months, had some doubts on, are now back on the front burner. And that gives any bank an opportunity to participate in the progress. Again, last year and a half, the consumer in India has been a little bit, I would say, wary about the property bubble, about asset prices and so on. So it stayed away from acquiring these products. Now with inflation near zero and an estimation that property probably is at its bottom or somewhere near the bottom, that consumer also could come back. I would put the context for any bank in this environment would be bright.
Well, is there one more aspect of India that we need to think about, and it's the state balance sheet and the policy part of India?
There are two parts to this. One is if you look at the fiscal deficit of the center and the various states in India, it had been contracting dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years. I would think that the expansion in the deficit during the last our fiscal year, which ended on March 31st, I think is not as bad as that of some of the developing countries. And I would think that what the government did was probably the right amount of stimulus.
But could the government afford to do it?
Clearly, if you look at India in context, you have a situation where the government is sitting on a whole lot of assets which can be released, and which I'm sure this government will start by releasing. These are investments or ownership in public sector companies. These are things like spectrum. These are things like natural resources, which I'm sure they will give out on a royalty basis. So many ways in which a government can quote unquote monetize what it has. I actually am not afraid of the deficit at all, and they should be able to bring it to modest levels very soon. Point A. Second point, I'm a contrarian. I believe that there's a chicken and egg problem here, particularly for developing countries. Developing countries which are otherwise well managed and have growth dynamics in place, and I think India clearly, squarely fits into that, can afford to go on the deficit route to fund developmental projects. I'm not talking of go on the deficit route for wasteful expenditure. For developmental projects, because these will bear a return in the coming years, and that will defray the servicing that you would need to do on this.
Is it the same route that the newly industrialized economies took in the 1990s, where you run deficit budgets, where your funding cost becomes challenged because you're a net borrower of foreign currency and so on? Is that the same profile that we expect to see?
I think a variety of routes have been taken by various nations. Some have actually borrowed from abroad and to fund their own growth. And I would think that in India, most of the growth has happened from within. The other thing that I need to put in context in India is when you talk about deficits, the deficit is not met through printing paper. The deficit has been met through impounding savings. Now, that is
Right,
a very hard way to go through, because so that is, honestly speaking, ought not to be inflationary. You can say that it has preempted somebody from getting that money.
Right.
I think that is where the challenge is. How do you balance this? The challenge is not that it will need to mismanage balance sheet.
Right, which then puts pressure on the banking system, which is straining because on the one hand it wants to be liberalized, it wants to be efficient. On the other hand, it's really an instrument of monetary policy in that sense.
But Emmanuel, what has happened is in India, and this is the remarkable thing, over the last 5 to 6 years, I have seen corporate profitability go to a level where it has been able to meet, the free cash flows have been able to meet 60 to 70% of investment plans that these companies had. Frankly, more than that they could not invest, because I don't think there's absorptive capacity in terms of investment or the market to absorb that capacity. The balance came from access to equity markets or a little bit from access to debt. So through the expansion of the last 6, 7 years on the corporate front, corporates actually deleveraged. So we had a situation where, if I look at 10 years back, the total debt to equity ratio of Indian corporates was over 3:1. That has shrunk to a little over maybe 1:1 today, and if you then look at long-term debt to equity, it has come down from 2:1 to maybe 0.6:1 because of incremental cash flows that have come up. So I would think that we are still learning the dynamics of a country of 1 billion changing shape. And I think economic theory also probably has something to understand.
You